Bank Secrecy Law, Republic Act 1405. In this law, all deposits of whatever nature with banks or banking institutions in the Philippines, and please take note that it includes investments in bonds issued by the government of the Philippines, its political subdivisions and instrumentalities are hereby considered as absolutely confidential in nature and may not be examined, inquired, or looked into by any person, government official, bureau, or office, except upon written permission of the depositor or in cases of impeachment or upon order of a competent court in case of bribery, dereliction of duty of public official, or in cases where the money deposited or invested is the subject matter of litigation. So basically, what we know of this law is that our bank deposits are confidential and it cannot be inquired into. What if, what if you have a bank deposit and your spouse would want to ask details about your bank deposit? Can he or she force the bank to reveal or um, to divulge your deposit to your spouse? Answer no. Why not? Well, because this applies to any person. So you see here, any person, and lalo na if it's a government official, bureau, or office. What about if you have um, if you availed of a service of a quasi-banking institution? In other words, what you have um, is a deposit substitute, and we discussed this last time. Deposit substitute. Okay, is this also covered by the law? Answer yes. Where is this? This is this part, including investment in bonds issued by the government of the Philippines or its political subdivisions. Okay? Now, to summarize, what are prohibited by this law is inquiry by any person. Okay, we discussed this earlier. What is the meaning of any person? And the disclosure of bank deposits made by an official or employee of a banking institution. Okay? The defense is if such disclosure was made under any of the exceptions provided in the law concerning such deposits. But there are other exceptions aside from those provided under Section 2. So that those these are the acts that are prohibited under the said law. Okay. Now, what are the covered deposits? Okay. So the law covers all bank accounts of whatever nature, and it includes trust accounts. Remember the deposit substitutes. Okay. Because a trust account is an example of a deposit substitute. In the case of Ejercito versus Sandigan Bayan, so this is 2006 case, the court explained that the trust accounts are covered by the bank secrecy law because the contention that bank accounts are not covered by deposit does not lie. Okay, because the argument was that bank deposit law or bank secrecy law under RA 1405, it was argued that it only covers deposit where this debtor creditor relationship was created. between the bank and the depositor. Now, the Supreme Court said that such argument does not lie. In this case, the Supreme Court said that the trust account in question is without a doubt such an account. The trust agreement between the bank and the petitioner provides that the trust accounts covers deposits, placements, or investment. And this is for and in behalf of the petitioner. And the court said that it was intended not merely to remain with the bank, but the money will be invested elsewhere. And the court said that if we are to exclude such trust account under the coverage of 1405, then this will encourage private hoarding of funds that could otherwise be invested by the bank in other ventures contrary to the policy. Okay, so in other words, such trust account is also confidential in nature. However, as explained by the court in this case, the protection afforded by 1405 or the bank secrecy law is not absolute. There are recognized exceptions, and these are based, the exceptions are provided for under Section 2 and there are other legal bases as well. But in the case of Ejercito versus Sandigan Bayan, there are two exceptions that the court said are applicable. Number one, examination of bank accounts upon order of a competent court in cases of bribery or dereliction of duty of a public official, and where the money deposited or invested is the subject matter of litigation, as what happened in this case. Okay, again, to summarize, trust account is confidential, covered by Republic Act 1405, but exceptions also apply. Now, speaking of exceptions, under 1405, there are four exceptions. The first is when there is a written permission of the depositor or investor. Okay, so this is yung mga waiver na tinatawag. Okay, so if you recall, we see this whenever politicians would dare yung mga rivals nila to sign a waiver. Okay, so this is the basis of that. Because with that waiver, the bank account may be inquired into. Second exception is impeachment cases. When in impeachment cases, this provides a valid ground to seek a court order for the examination of bank deposit. Also, upon order of the court of or upon order of a competent court in cases of bribery or dereliction of duty. And number 4, also upon order of a competent court where the money deposited or invested is the subject matter of litigation. So these are the 4 exceptions under 1405, but there are other exceptions that are provided elsewhere. And these are the things that we will discuss later. What about foreign currency deposits? The deposits that are dollar denominated or other currency, foreign currency. Are these deposits also confidential? The law, Republic Act 6426 So this is the law on foreign currency deposit. The law provides that all foreign currency deposits are hereby declared and considered as also absolutely confidential, except upon written permission of the depositor. Okay, so that is provided under RA 6426. Okay? And the law provided further that the foreign currency deposits shall also be exempt from attachment, garnishment, or any other or process of any court, legislative body, government agency, or any other administrative body whatsoever. Right? Now, in the case of GSIS versus Court of Appeals, the court said that these two laws pertaining to 1405 and the foreign currency deposit law or 6426, these laws both support the confidentiality of bank deposits and there are no conflicts between these two laws. 1405 was enacted for the purpose of giving encouragement to the people to deposit their money in banking institution kesa kung saan-saan lang nila tinatago yung pera. That was the intention, to convince that people deposit their hard-earned money in the bank so that this money may be used to fund the economy, and to encourage them to do that, the banks are mandated to treat these deposits as confidential. And this is to discourage private hoarding, okay? So that again, this money may be used to assist in the economic development of the country. And it covers all bank deposits in the country and no distinction was made between domestic and foreign deposits. So, thus, said the court, 1405 is considered a law of general application. On the other hand, 6426 is for specifically for foreign currency deposit. Therefore, it is a special law designed especially for foreign currency deposits in the Philippines. As we have learned in the statutory construction class, general law does not nullify a specific or special law. Okay? However, if there are conflicts, then it is the special law that will prevail. So in case there are conflicts between 1405 and 6426, it is 6426 that applies, as what the court has said in the GSIS versus Court of Appeals case. Okay? Now, so basically what the Supreme Court said, that without the written permission from DOMSAT, Westmont Bank cannot be legally compelled to disclose the bank deposits of DOMSAT. Otherwise, the bank will expose itself to criminal liability. Right. Now, in the case of China Banking Corporation versus Court of Appeals, this is another 2016 case. The private respondent to this, accused his daughter of stealing his dollar deposits with Citibank. The latter allegedly received the checks from Citibank and deposited them to her account in China Bank. The subject checks were presented in evidence. A subpoena was issued to employees of the China Bank to testify on these checks. The China Bank argued that the Citibank dollar checks with both respondent and or her daughter as payers deposited with China Bank may not be looked into. So they were claiming that these are confidential and the bank cannot be compelled to divulge the information because they will violate the secrecy of foreign currency deposits. The Supreme Court in this case highlighted the exception to the non-disclosure of foreign currency deposit. And again, that is when there is a written permission of the depositor. Okay? And the Supreme Court also ruled that the respondent as owner of the fund unlawfully taken and which are undisputably now deposited in the China Bank. Therefore, the respondent has the right to inquire into the said deposits. Now, what are the other exceptions? So other exceptions, first is that which is found under RA 3019 or the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act in case of a order from a competent court involving cases of unexplained wealth. Then a bank account may be inquired into. Another is examination under the anti-money laundering law, which we will discuss in detail later. Under this particular law, the Court of Appeals, the Court of Appeals may issue a bank inquiry order. Okay? A bank inquiry order may be issued by the Court of Appeals, and this is to examine or inquire into any particular deposit or investment account that is related to an unlawful activity or money laundering offense. Again, it is the Court of Appeals that is considered a court of competent jurisdiction. Okay? Now, what about the Anti-Money Laundering Council itself? Can the AMLC issue an order that will allow the AMLC Secretariat to inquire into or examine a particular deposit? The answer is yes. Okay? However, these are only allowed where the deposit or investment involved are in any way related to any of the following unlawful activities. In other words, the jurisdiction or the power of the AMLC to issue a, a bank inquiry order is only limited to the following predicate crimes. First, kidnapping for ransom under the revised penal code. Certain sections under RA 9165 or the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act. So it's section 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Hijacking under RA 6435 and destructive arson and murder under RA under the revised penal code. Similar felonies or offenses which are punishable under penal laws of other countries. In other words, these are the laws, but but the offender has committed these offenses in another country which penalize the offense or the felonies also included under RA 9372, terrorism and conspiracy to commit terrorism, and the newest addition is financing terrorism. So if any of this would be the predicate crime, then it is the AMLC that has the power to issue the bank inquiry order. Another exception is periodic examination by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. We covered this item before. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas as the agency that regulates and ensure that the banks are complying with all the laws has this power to conduct periodic examination through its bank examiners. And um, and because of that, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or the BSP may inquire into or examine any deposit or investment with any banking institution or non-bank financial institution when the examination is made in the course of periodic or special examination. But then again, it has to be in accordance with the rules of examination of the BSP, such that if there is a bank examiner who, without the authority of the BSP, would examine the bank or a particular bank, then the remedy of the bank is to deny that bank examiner from examining the bank on the ground that the examination must always follow or be done in accordance with the rules. Okay? Now, another exception is inspection, this time by the ombudsman. And this is provided under the Ombudsman Act that gave the ombudsman as one of its powers to administer oath, issue subpoena or subpoena duces tecum, and take testimony in any investigation or inquiry, including the power to examine and have access to bank accounts and records. Okay, so this is one of the powers of the ombudsman. But there are requisites. Yeah, there are requisites such that if you will be asked a question on this, the ombudsman issued this subpoena to submit bank documents and there are no pending cases. Can the bank refuse to obey such subpoena? The answer is yes, right? Because the requisites before the ombudsman may inquire into such deposit is that there must be a pending case before a court of competent jurisdiction. Another requisite is that the account must be clearly identified and the inspection must be limited to the subject matter of the pending case. And then the bank personnel and the account holder must be notified to be present during the inspection, and such inspection may cover only the account identified in the pending case. So absent any of these requirements, then the ombudsman cannot issue the subpoena duces tecum. Another exception is in case of dormant accounts or bank accounts na walang galaw, walang deposit, walang withdrawal for the last 10 years, and that would be considered a dormant account. And Act number 3936 provides that this dormant accounts will be forfeited in favor of the government. Okay, so that is the reason why this is also a recognized exception to the bank secrecy law. Another is upon inquiry of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Is it in all cases that the Commissioner of Internal Revenue possess this power to inquire into bank deposit? The answer is no. This is only with respect to situations that are covered by Section 6 of the National Internal Revenue Code that empowers the commissioner to inquire into bank deposits when there is a dissident to determine the gross estate of the dissident. And the said taxpayer filed an application for compromise of his tax liability. Okay? So only when there is this application for a compromise of the tax liability that the taxpayer will be required to waive in writing his privilege under the Bank Secrecy Law or RA 1405 or other special laws for that matter. And this will now empower or will give authority to the commissioner to inquire into the bank deposits of the taxpayer. So again, there should always still be waiver. Okay? The waiver must be in writing. So without this waiver, it will not be, the commissioner will not be allowed to inquire into the bank deposit even if there is already an application for compromise. Under DOS 3, okay? So I hope you can still recall DOS 3 when a loan will be taken by a deposit by a director, officer, stockholder, and related interest, and the loan will be taken from the bank where said depositor, officer, stockholder, or related interest is part of the bank, meaning um, the director is also the director of the bank where the loan was taken from. So this is DOS 3. And in case of DOS 3, the law provides that it is a requirement that the lending bank to waive the secrecy of his deposit. Okay, this is to again to avoid any suspicion that the director is using his power or his authority over the bank for his personal gain. Now, what would be the penalty in case of violation of 1405? It is penalized, imprisonment for 5 years, or fine of not more than 220,000 pesos or both. Okay, this is upon the discretion of the court. Okay, so the next topic would be the anti-money laundering law. Of all the laws that we will cover, you will see that this is the law that would be frequently amended. So it's RA 9160 amended by 9194, 10167, 10365, 10397, and then the latest is 11521. So it's quite difficult to keep abreast with this particular law. Okay, so our discussion would be updated as of RA 11521. Now, what is money laundering? So money laundering is actually a crime where the proceeds of an unlawful activity, meaning there is a crime, there is an unlawful activity, and the proceeds of that unlawful activity has been transacted in order to make it appear that the said proceed would come from legitimate source. So in other words, this is about the proceeds of a crime. And such proceeds of the crime has been laundered, meaning hinugasan para mukhang galing sa malinis, and that particular act is a crime itself. Okay? So if you will really think about it, the anti-money laundering law, although it is covered under the commercial law in the bar exam, it is actually a penal law because the law defines a crime. This is how the crime was defined, and the law provided a penalty for that crime. So this is actually penal law. Nevertheless, this is covered in the syllabus under the commercial law, and that's the reason why we will be covering this. And if you check the trend in the bar examination, the this particular law has been asked several times already. So the possibility that this will be asked is quite is present. It's possible. Okay. Now, how is this crime committed? So the crime is committed by any person. So regardless of whether that person is a government official or not, or a bank official or not, then that person may commit this crime. But the requirement is that there must be knowledge. That person must know that the monetary instrument or property represents, involves, or relates to the proceeds of an unlawful activity. So this is important. It must come, or the money must come from an unlawful activity, and the person knew that fact. Okay? Now, if that person knew that fact and that person transacts said monetary instrument or property, or convert, transfers, disposes of, moves, acquires, possesses, or uses said monetary instrument. Okay? So the first is transacting. So you use the money for whatever business transaction, that then that will fall under A. Under paragraph B, you convert that. Convert that into gold bullion, or you convert the money into jewelry, you convert the money into to something that is of value, to make it appear that the money or the said value or diamonds or gold is now clean, then that is also money laundering. The third is you conceal it, you disguise it. You disguise the true nature, source, location, disposition of the said monetary instrument or property, then that is also money laundering. Also, attempt or conspire to commit money laundering as referred to in paragraph A. So in other words, A is the criminal. So A has this bundle of cash, and B conspired with A to commit any of these money laundering offenses. Like B offers that he will be the one to convert the proceeds, the money, the monetary instrument, to make it appear that it came from a legitimate source. Then this B is now committing money laundering. And also, when any person would aid, abet, assist, or counsel in the commission of the money laundering, then that person is also committing money laundering. And finally, insofar as the person who performs or fails to perform any act, and as a result, he facilitates the offenses of money laundering, then this is money laundering. So example of this is the act of reporting a covered transaction. Later, we will be discussing what is a covered transaction. And because there is this duty to report a covered transaction, if that person fails to perform such particular act, then that person too is committing money laundering. Okay? Now, we spoke about knowledge. Okay? So knowledge is an essential element of the crime, without which there can be no money laundering. However, knowledge is a state of mind. It's quite difficult to establish whether the person knew about the illegality of the proceeds or not. So, the element of knowledge may be established either by direct or by circumstantial evidence. So, let's say, for example, A is selling illegal drugs of such huge volume. Okay, so maramihan magbenta si A. And B is the spouse of A. Now, it is B who is transacting the proceeds, the monetary instrument, or the money that uh, um, were the proceeds of the illegal drugs business. And now when B was apprehended for the crime of um, money laundering, B claims that he or she has no knowledge. Then, such knowledge may be proven by number one, B is spouse of A. It's quite unlikely that B does not know the real business of his or her spouse. And given the fact that it was shown that the volume of transaction is quite big, it's really quite unbelievable that B is not knowledgeable about the illicit transaction of his or hers. All right. Now, now, so money laundering is also committed by any covered person. This was the example given a while ago. If the covered person fails to report any covered or suspicious transaction, then this is anti-money laundering too. Okay, so let's have example. A is a bank. Okay, and B has been known to deposit money to A, the bank. And the bank actually knew that the proceeds or the money deposited by B came from an illicit source. And the bank should report it. But the bank did not report it. So the bank is committing a crime. What is that crime? And the bank is committing money laundering because it fails to report, okay, to report any covered or suspicious transaction. Ah. So we talked about covered person or covered institutions. There are two major categories of covered institutions. Number one are financial institutions. Okay? Financial institutions either supervised and or regulated by number one, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Number two, Insurance Commission. And number three, the Securities and Exchange Commission. So, first kind, financial institution, be it regulated by the BSP, be it regulated by the IC, be it regulated by the SEC. These are covered institutions. The second kind would be these designated non-financial businesses and professions, or DNFBPs, the designated non-financial businesses and professions. Now, what are the financial institutions regulated by the BSP, by the IC, and by the SEC? Under the BSP, we have the banks, we have the quasi-banks, we have the trust entities, we have the pawn shops, the non-stock and savings loans association, other non-bank financial institutions under the supervision of the BSP, electronic money issuers, and we are quite familiar with them, electronic money issuers, and foreign exchange dealers, money changers, remittance, and other transfer companies. These are the entities are supervised and or regulated by the BSP. Under the insurance commission, of course, we have the insurance companies, the pre-need companies, the insurance agents, insurance brokers, professional reinsurers, reinsurance brokers, holding company systems, mutual benefit associations, and all other persons and their subsidiaries and affiliates supervised and regulated by the IC. Okay, so even pre-need companies, even insurance companies, insurance brokers, of course, they are under the insurance commission, and they are all covered institutions. Under the SEC, security dealers, brokers, salesmen, investment houses, and other similar persons managing securities. Of course, securities, may mga shares, okay, or shares of stocks, okay, or rendering services such as investment agents, advisors, or consultants. Mutual funds or other open-end investment companies, closed-end investment companies or issuers and other entities administering or otherwise dealing in commodities or financial derivatives, okay, valuable objects, cash substitutes, and other monetary instruments supervised and regulated by the SEC. Right? Now, what about these DNPBPs? Okay. Now, it might interest you to know that jewelry dealers, they are covered institution under AMLA as a designated non-financial business and profession. Also, dealers in precious metals and dealers in precious stones. So precious metals and stones, talks about gold and diamonds, and these are also covered institution or person. Also, company service providers. Okay, yung mga nauusong company service providers or outsourcing. And their business provide any of the following services to the third parties, acting as a formation agent. Okay, so you offer yourself as an agent to form a corporation. So you are actually a formation agent. If that's the case, then you are actually a DNFBP, a company service provider. Or if your service provides this service to act as a director or corporate secretary of a company, partner of a partnership, or similar position in relation to other juridical person, then you will be a covered person. Okay? Also, when the service provides a registered office, so you have this place, you rent it out as an office, diba? Uso ngayon ito. Then this is also a covered person. You provide a business address or accommodation, then you are a designated non-financial business and profession. And also, when you act as a nominee shareholder, for another person, then that person is also a covered institution or a covered person. Right? Now, also, persons, including lawyers, very important. So, persons, including lawyers, accountants, and other professionals who provide the following services: managing of client money, securities, or assets, management of a bank, savings, securities, or other assets, organization or contribution for the creation, operation, and management of companies, creation, operation, or management of juridical persons or arrangements and buying and selling business entities. Then that person is a covered person under AMLA. And even lawyers, if these are the services that the lawyer provides, then that lawyer is also a covered person. But, okay, please take note that the term covered person shall exclude, okay? So it excludes lawyers and accountants acting as independent legal professionals. So if the lawyer is an independent legal professional, then that lawyer or accountant is not a covered person in relation to information concerning their clients. And if that information would compromise the attorney-client relationship. Question: what is the meaning of an independent legal professional? So, a lawyer or accountant working in a private firm or a solo practitioner ng kanyang occupation is purely legal or accounting services to their clients. Then that is an independent legal professional. Let's say, for example, attorney A. Okay? So attorney A has this business. And part of the business is, let's say, for example, to act as a director of several companies of his clients. Is attorney A an independent legal professional? Answer: no. Why? Because this is not purely legal or accounting service. Let's say, for example, attorney B is working in a financial company. And this company is engaged in money laundering. And when the company was actions or activities were unearthed, okay, they were caught by the authorities. Now, Attorney B said that he should not be held liable for not reporting that the covered transactions or suspicious transactions. Is attorney B correct? Answer: no, because attorney B is not an independent legal professional. Supposing attorney C is a solo practitioner, and in the course of his practice, one of his clients, D, right? So was accused of money laundering, and he engaged the services of C. And in the process, C learned about the accounts of D. Should attorney C report it? Answer: no, because attorney C is an independent legal professional. Yeah. Now another uh, designated non-financial business or profession would be casinos. And it includes internet casinos, ship-based casinos, with respect to casino cash transactions. Because it's possible nga naman that you want to launder the money, you enter into a casino, you change you exchange your money 1 million to chips, you play some, and then after losing some, you with you again. Sabi mo, ayaw mo na, ipapapalit ko na yung chips ko into cash, and that makes it, well, appear legitimate. And that is now the reason why casinos are covered institution, because it is a DNFBP. Real estate brokers, okay? They are also covered person, and other offshore gaming operators, as well as service providers regulated by PAGCOR. They are also covered institution. Okay? Now, what are the obligations of a covered institution? So we discussed what are these covered institutions. So what are the obligations of a covered institution? First, they need to comply with all the requirements under AMLA and other AMLC issuances. Okay, so they need to be updated with the issuances by the AMLC in order to be fully compliant with their obligation. Now, specifically, they have the following obligations: to prevent money laundering, customer identification, keeping of records, and to report, very important, report covered and suspicious transactions. Now, obligations of covered institutions. Okay? So if the covered institutions are corporations, okay, and we are talking about criminal liability, because corporations are artificial persons, sino ang pwedeng makulong sa kanila? In case of corporations, it is the board of directors. In case of a partnership, then it is the partners. In case of a sole proprietorship, of course, it is the sole proprietor. They shall be ultimately responsible for the covered person's compliance. Okay? And of course, insofar as the board of directors of a corporation is concerned, usually big companies would hire professionals to be their point person in their compliance with AMLA. Okay? They too may be liable based on the issuances of AMLA. Okay? Now, covered transactions. Ito yung mga i-report ng mga covered institutions. Okay, so whenever there is a transaction that would fall under any of this, the covered person should report it to the AMLC. What are these? Transaction in cash or equivalent. If this exceeds 500,000 pesos, then this must be reported as a covered transaction. If the transaction involves jewelry or equivalent, then the transaction that exceeds 1 million pesos, this is a covered transaction. A casino cash transaction or equivalent exceeding 5 million pesos, it is a covered transaction. When the transaction involves real estate and it exceeds 7.5 million pesos, then this too is a covered transaction. Okay? Now, what about suspicious transaction? For suspicious transaction, any transaction, regardless of the amount. In other words, even if the transaction is below the threshold. For cash, it's 500,000. For jewelry, it's 1 million. For casino cash transaction, it's 5 million. For real estate, it's 7.5 million. If the transaction is below this threshold amount, it may be a suspicious transaction where any of these circumstances, kapag merong present na circumstance, makes it suspicious. Now, these are the suspicious circumstances. No underlying legal or trade obligation. So si Mr. A, nagde-deposit ng 400,000 pesos, hindi niya maipaliwanag. Saan galing tong pera na to? Eh dati ang mga deposit nito, pa 10 piso. Bakit ngayon biglang naging 400,000 pesos? Then this should be reported as a suspicious transaction. The client is not properly identified. Ayaw magpakilala ni client. Basta gusto niyang i-deposito, then that is also a suspicious transaction. Amount involved is not commensurate with the business. So the business is di naman kalakihan yung business. And yet, ang mga deposito niya ay ang lalaki. That should be reported as a suspicious transaction or suspicious transaction niya. And taking into account all known circumstances, it may be perceived that the client's transaction is structured in order to avoid being subject or reporting requirements. In other words, if the covert transaction is 500,000 per transaction. So what the client is doing is today magde-deposit siya ng 499,000 pesos. The next day, 300,000 pesos. The next day, 400,000 pesos. Okay? And this person appears not to have an underlying legal purpose or economic justification. But what if, let's say, for example, A is a depositor at ang pera niya sa bangko is, let's say, for example, 1,000 pesos lang. One day, A deposits 1 million pesos. And A revealed that this is part of his inheritance. Will this be a suspicious transaction? No, it's not. Because in this particular case, there is a legal justification. So, question, should the bank report this? Answer, yes. But not under suspicious transaction. Under what? Under covert transaction. Because regardless of any circumstance, if the cash transaction exceeds 500,000 pesos, then this should be reported as a covert transaction. Okay? Another suspicious circumstance is any circumstance relating to the transaction which is observed to deviate from the profile of the client. Yun nga, yung dati pa 1,000 lang, biglang naging 400,000 and all, then that would be suspicious transaction. The transaction is in any way related to money laundering or related unlawful activity that is about to be committed or is being or has been committed, or any transaction that is similar or analogous, then this should be reported as a suspicious transaction. All right. Now, what about in case let's say, for example, an unidentified client. So one day, this client went to a bank and he tried to open a bank account and he tried to deposit that amount of money. But even if he was asked to produce identification cards, he refused to do so. He just merely says that can he open a numbered account, etc., etc. And the bank tried to explain to him that it is no longer allowed. Numbered accounts are no longer allowed, etc., etc. And therefore, the client just left the bank. So this is an unsuccessful attempt. Should it be reported? The answer is yes, it should also be reported as a suspicious transaction. Okay, and this is to alert the authorities that there is this person who, under suspicious circumstances, is trying to deposit or convert the money into a bank account. Now, what if the transaction is both covert and suspicious? How should it be reported? It should be reported as a suspicious transaction. Okay? Why? Because covert transaction is just a matter of reporting. Yeah, it's just a matter of reporting. So even if you have legitimate source of income, if your deposit is more than 500,000, it has to be reported. So a suspicious transaction is, uh, is somewhat dubious. Okay, it somewhat elicits certain suspicion that the money came from an illicit source and therefore it has to be reported as such. Okay, and that's the reason why when the transaction is both covered and suspicious, it has to be reported as suspicious. Who are exempted from reporting? So we discussed this earlier because independent legal or accounting professionals, they are not covered institutions, therefore they are exempted from reporting. Okay? Because if they will do so, then they will violate their attorney-client um, confidentiality. Now, however, lawyers and accountants are not precluded. So if they want to report by submitting these reports, suspicious transaction reports to the council with regard to any transaction of their clients that is in any way related to money laundering or unrelated related unlawful activity that is about to be committed or being or has been committed, then the lawyers and accountants are of course free to do so. They are not precluded. Now, what about this safe harbor provision? What is this? So, kaya siya safe harbor provision, it shields, okay? It shields a person if that person would report in good faith a covered or suspicious transaction. So, Section 9 of the law says that there should be no administrative, criminal, or civil proceedings against any person who have made this report a covered transaction or suspicious report in the regular performance of his duty and in good faith, even if such reporting did not result into a criminal prosecution, then this person should not be held liable for that under the safe harbor provision. Now, will it justify the giving of tip to the reporters? Let's see. Now, Section 9 says that covered persons, as well as their employees and officers, they are prohibited from communicating directly or indirectly in a manner or by any means to a person or entity or the media that the fact that a covered or suspicious transaction has been or is about to be reported. Okay? Because such report has to be confidential. Now, if, okay, any information shall be published, what will happen? Then the person, the concerned officer or employee shall be held criminally liable. Okay? So any information about such reporting shall not be published. But if this particular rule is violated, then there will be criminal liability. Okay? Now, we talked about the unlawful activities, and these are called the predicate crimes. So almost all crimes in the statute books, parang naisama dito. Mostly under the revised penal code. Okay? And other special laws. So, kidnapping for ransom, again, under the revised penal code, Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act, the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, plunder, robbery and extortion, wetting and mashaw, piracy on high seas, qualified theft, swindling, smuggling, violation of the E-Commerce Act, hijacking, destructive arson, murder, terrorism, and conspiracy to commit terrorism, financing of terrorism, bribery, fraud, and illegal exactions and transactions, malversation of public funds and property, forgeries and counterfeiting, anti-trafficking of persons, violation of the revised forestry code, violation of the Philippine Fisheries Code, violation of the Philippine Mining Act, violation of the Wildlife Resource Conservation and Protection Act, violation of the National Caves and Cave Resources Management Protection Act, violation of the Anti-Carnapping Act, violation of laws on illegal unlawful possession, manufacture, dealing in, acquisition, or disposition of firearms, ammunition, or explosives, anti-fencing law, migrant workers and overseas Filipinos Act, intellectual property code, which is, by the way, our next topic, voyeurism, anti-photo and video voyeurism act, anti-child pornography act, special protection of children against abuse and exploitation and discrimination, fraudulent practices and other violations under Securities Regulation Code, violation of the Strategic Trade Management Act, violation of the National Internal Revenue Code, felonies and offenses of similar nature, okay? Punishable under the penal laws of other countries. Okay, later we will have a special discussion about this similar nature, and this is about it. The so-called safe conduct approach. Okay? Now, in determining whether or not felony or offenses punishable under the penal laws of other country is of similar nature as to constitute an unlawful activity under AMLA, it is sufficient that both the Philippines and other jurisdictions criminalize the conduct. Okay? So let's say for example, yung yung let's say for example, uh, this one, the violation of the national cave and cave resources. So let's say for example, under our law, we penalize if caves or resources that may be taken from caves would be illegally exacted. And that particular crime is also penalized under other country like the United States. Okay? Now, is the law considered similar nature? Answer yes. But what if the law in the United States did not provide that? The law was not named Cave and Cave Resources Act. The United States gave the law a different name, but the same act was penalized. Is it of similar nature? Answer, it is similar nature. Okay? Because even if the other country does not denominate the offense under the same name or nomenclature, it will not matter. What matters is the conduct or activity. If it is basically the same act that we penalize under any of those predicate crimes, then that particular act is considered similar nature if it's criminalized in another country. Okay? Now, what about if the law or the law that was made the predicate crime was amended? or repeal? Will it erase the liability under AMLA? Well, the law says that when the unlawful activity which the law has been amended by way of merely renaming, renumbering, or rephrasing the relevant provisions, it shall continue to be an unlawful activity, but not when the law was repealed. Because if the law was repealed, then then the act is no longer a crime. And of course, we all know that nullum crimen nol when sine lege, or there is no crime when there is no law punishing it, applies in our jurisdiction, then the act is no longer penalized. Hence, there can be no money laundering when the act or the money is a proceed of a lawful act. Okay, so that is the case here. Now, what court has jurisdiction? Okay, it is the regional trial court, okay, that has jurisdiction to hear and try money laundering case if that is committed by a private individual. What if the offender is a public officer? The same, it's the RTC that has jurisdiction if the public officer is not covered by the jurisdiction of the Sandigan Bayan. And of course, the Sandigan Bayan jurisdiction, right? It will depend on the crime as well as the salary grade. No? Basically, it's SG 27, and the crime involves yung in relation to their conduct as an official of the government. Okay? Now, if the offender under money laundering is covered by the jurisdiction of the Sandigan Bayan, then the case should be filed before the Sandigan Bayan. If not, it should be filed with the trial court. Okay? Now, so the Sandigan Bayan shall have jurisdiction to try money laundering cases committed by public officers under its jurisdiction, and also including private persons who are in conspiracy with such public officers. So this is still a general rule, right? A private person may be tried under Sandigan Bayan if they are in conspiracy with a public officer covered by the Sandigan Bayan jurisdiction. Now, what about the predicate crime? What will happen to the predicate crime? Well, the crime, let's say for example, illegal drugs. So yung case na yon will proceed independently with the money laundering. Okay? And therefore, the person may be charged with and convicted of both money laundering and the unlawful activity. Double jeopardy rule does not apply in this case. Now, freeze order. What is this freeze order all about? So, in short, there is a deposit, right? There's a deposit, and whenever a freeze order is issued, then the no withdrawal will be allowed because this is under a freeze order. Under what authority can the freeze order be issued? It is issued by the Court of Appeals. Who can apply for it? It is the Anti-Money Laundering Council. Okay? It will direct the AMLC Secretariat, and they will file the ex parte petition through the Office of the Solicitor General. They will file this petition for issuance of the freeze order in the Court of Appeals. Now, what are the requirements for a freeze order issuance? So there should be no prior criminal charge, pendency of a case, conviction of unlawful activity, or money laundering offense. These are not necessary for the commencement or the resolution of a petition for freeze order. So in other words, if the petition was filed and it was objected on the ground that there is no criminal charge yet, will that be tenable? Answer, no, it's not tenable because there is no such requirement. No asset shall be frozen or to the prejudice of a candidate of an electoral office during an election period, supposing that the petition is filed during an election period, and assuming that there is really a valid ground to issue a freeze order. Should the court issue such a freeze order? Answer, no, because this is explicitly provided under the law. During an election period, no asset shall be frozen to the prejudice of a candidate. So it has to be the account of a candidate. No court shall issue a temporary restraining order or writ of injunction against freeze order except the Supreme Court. Let's say, for example, there is a freeze order that was issued by the CA. Now, as a remedy, the petitioner filed before the RTC for the issuance of a TRO. Should the RTC issue the TRO? Answer, no, because the regional trial court has no jurisdiction. It is only the Supreme Court that has the power to issue an injunction order against the freeze order issued by the Court of Appeals. Okay? Now, what is the period to resolve? The Court of Appeals shall resolve the petition to freeze within 24 hours. Now, what will happen, okay, when the freeze order has been issued? Okay, it shall be effectively, effective immediately and for a period of 20 days. Of course, we mentioned the effect, right? No withdrawal, no transaction, deposit, no transfer, no removal, no conversion, while the freeze order is effective. Okay? Now, the coverage of the freeze order. It is only limited to the amount of cash or monetary instrument or value of the property that the Court of Appeals find there is probable cause. Okay, so for probable cause, you refer to your discussion in the Bill of Rights. Okay, particularly when is probable cause present. Okay, who determines probable cause. Okay, and the freeze order shall not apply to amounts in the same account in excess of the amount or value of the proceeds or the predicate offense. Okay, so let's say, for example, the alleged proceeds of a predicate amount of a predicate crime is 1 million, but the deposit account is 2 million. So only 1 million will be covered. Okay, it shall not apply to the amount in excess of the value of the proceeds of the predicate crime. Now, there will be summary hearing. Okay, if before the expiration of the 20-day freeze order, the Court of Appeals shall conduct a summary hearing, and this time with notice to the parties. Kanina ex parte mag-apply, right? But in this particular case, the summary hearing will be conducted with notice to the parties to determine whether or not to modify or lift the freeze order or to extend its effectivity. Again, this is no longer an ex parte hearing, but it is summary hearing with notice to the parties. Okay? Now, pending resolution, the freeze order shall remain effective. Okay, so the freeze order shall take effect immediately and shall remain effective for a total period, but it should not exceed 6 months. Hindi naman pwedeng patagalin. Okay, so this is without prejudice to the asset preservation order. Now, what is the remedy of the account holder? So we learned earlier that a petition filed before the regional trial court for the issuance of a TRO is not a proper remedy. So the proper remedy is to file a motion to lift the freeze order. Okay, and the Court of Appeals must resolve the motion before the expiration of the freeze order. Now, lifting the effects of the freeze order. Okay, so the freeze order shall be deemed ipso facto lifted by the mere fact. Nag-expire yung 20 days, it shall be lifted ipso facto. Unless, of course, the money laundering complaint against a person whose money instrument was frozen, or a petition for against the frozen monetary instrument has been filed. So nagsampa na ng kaso, in which particular case the freeze order shall remain effective until the case is terminated or an asset preservation order is issued respectively. Right? Now, so we talked about the Court of Appeals issued freeze order. What about the AMLC, the council? Can the council or can the Anti-Money Laundering Council issue a freeze order under RA 10168? The answer is yes. If the crime is terrorism financing, then the Anti-Money Laundering Council has the power to issue a freeze order. Right. Now, we talked about this earlier, bank inquiry in relation to 1405 or the bank secrecy law. So we mentioned earlier that a court may issue a bank inquiry order. So it's also about the Court of Appeals. Okay? The AMLC Secretariat shall file before the Court of Appeals through the Office of the Solicitor General, again, an ex parte application for the issuance of bank inquiry order, or the order to have the bank examined or inquired into. Okay, and to look into the particular deposit or investment that is related to an unlawful activity. Okay, now the court order ex parte must be obtained before the AMLC can inquire into related accounts, meaning the council cannot inquire into the account without this court order. Otherwise, they will be violating the law. Now, the bank inquiry order, according to the law, must comply with sections 2 and 3 of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights, Article 3. Of course, you know that Section 2 is about search and seizure. All right, so search and seizure is unreasonable unless there is a valid warrant that is issued. And for the issuance of the valid warrant, diba, there are requisites, probable cause, determination of probable cause is made by the judge. Okay, this must be followed. Section 3 is about privacy. Okay, privacy of communication. So there are also legal requisites before intrusion is made. And one of the zones of privacy is yung deposit nga natin. So that the requirements under sections 2 and 3 of the Constitution must be followed, okay, before the court may issue a bank inquiry order. Now, we mentioned this already, okay? Now, the Section 11 of the Anti-Money Laundering Act provides for ex parte application and inquiry by the council into certain bank deposits, and this will not violate due process. Why? Because there is no physical seizure of the property yet. This is the ruling in the case of Subido, Pahente, Certeza Mendoza, and Binay Law Offices versus Court of Appeals. Okay? So when the court would issue a bank inquiry order done ex parte, this is not a violation of the due process laws because there is no seizure of the property at that particular stage. Yeah. Now, what is the period to resolve the application? Same with freeze order, also 24 hours from the filing. Okay. Now, so so this is the rule. There is this Republic Act 1405, but despite that, the AMLC may inquire into a particular deposit if there's a court order issued by the Court of Appeals. Okay. Now, we also discussed this earlier about the authority of the council itself to issue an ex parte order. But again, it has to be re-emphasized that this is only true for the following unlawful activities. So we mentioned this earlier, kidnapping for ransom, RA 9165 for the following provisions: hijacking, destructive arson, murder, similar felonies, punishable under penal laws of other countries. So this, if they are penalized in the country, in other countries, also terrorism and conspiracy to commit terrorism and financing of terrorism. Okay. Now, asset forfeiture. So this talks about forfeiture of the deposit or whatever asset that is made subject of inquiry or a case, a money laundering case. Now, upon determination that probable cause exists, so any probable cause, I hope you can still recall, this is circumstances, any circumstance that would engender a reasonable person to believe that a crime has been committed. In this particular case, that money laundering has been committed. And this is now the proceeds, the monetary instrument or property. And this is related to an unlawful activity or a money laundering offense. The AMLC shall file with the regional trial court a verified petition for civil forfeiture. Again, it is now this court that has jurisdiction for petition for civil forfeiture. If it's the Court of Appeals that has the jurisdiction to issue a bank inquiry order as well as the freeze order, it is the regional trial court, the Court of General Jurisdiction, to hear and decide petition for civil forfeiture. Now, so the rule is prescribed under AM number 051104 SC. So this is the rule issued in insofar as the civil forfeiture, asset preservation, and freezing of monetary instrument is concerned. Okay. Now, what is the remedy when there is already an order for asset forfeiture? Motion to discharge. That is the remedy. A motion to discharge the asset preservation order. Okay. Now, where there is conviction for money laundering, the court shall issue a judgment in favor of the government. In other words, the asset will be forfeited in favor of the government. Okay? Now, what about if there are claims? May mga naghahabol doon. Okay? So they may file the necessary petition in order to lay claim on the forfeited assets. Okay? So let's say, for example, may utang sa'yo yung money launderer and the amount is um, is under litigation or has been uh, under under investigation or litigation under anti-money laundering law, you may have this remedy to file a claim on those forfeited assets. Okay? Now, payment in lieu of forfeiture. So, this particular part of the law give the offender the option rather than uh, forfeiture of the monetary instrument or property. The said person may opt to pay the penalty in lieu of forfeiture. Okay, and this provision shall apply both in civil and criminal forfeiture. So in other words, this is a way to compromise the liability. And that ends our discussion on banking. Thank you very much.